I still remember the way the light poured into our kitchen that morning. Warm, golden, almost too perfect to be real. I was standing at the window with a cup of raspberry leaf tea, my fingers stained slightly from the colored pencils I'd been using to sketch a winged fairy floating above a bed of wildflowers. Her wings shimmered in the morning light, just like mine used to in the early days of my marriage when I believed Dylan Monroe would never hurt me. The back door creaked softly and I turned, smiling. Dylan stood there with a giant bouquet of peonies, my favorite. "Happy anniversary, my artist," he said with that disarming smile I'd fallen for years ago. He looked handsome. Crisp shirt rolled to the elbows, hair perfectly styled, cologne subtle but familiar. "You remembered?" I asked, setting down my mug and walking toward him, hand instinctively resting on the curve of my growing belly. How could I forget? 5 years together. 3 of those married. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He pulled me into a careful hug, his hand grazing the small of my back before settling on my waist. For a moment, I let myself melt into it. The flowers went into the cut glass vase my grandmother had left me, and a fragrance mixed with the scent of steeping tea. I told myself this was love. This was safe. This was home. I should have known better. That same afternoon, we had our 20-week ultrasound. I remember lying on that crinkly white paper in the cold exam room, Dylan sitting beside me, hand loosely in mine. The ultrasound wand pressed against my belly, and the static-filled hum of the machine echoed softly around us. "Let's see what we've got here," the technician mumbled, eyes narrowing at the screen. I felt my stomach tighten. "Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to lift my head. "Lie back, you're okay," she reassured. Then, with a smile that changed everything, she said, "You're having twins. 2 strong heartbeats. 2 little boys. Twins." For a second, the room froze. I laughed through my tears, looking at Dylan, wanting to see that same joy in his eyes. Instead, I saw a flicker. Just a flicker. His hand in mine had gone cold. "Twins," he repeated. His voice cracked slightly. Wow. That's great. That's really great." He leaned in to kiss my knuckles, but I noticed the tightness in his jaw, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I wanted to believe it was shock. I needed to believe that, because the alternative, the idea that he wasn't happy about our children, that was too painful to entertain. Still, on the ride home, the silence between us was loud. I kept looking at the printout of the sonogram. 2 tiny forms floating in the darkness, like stars beginning to form. "We'll need a second crib," I said, trying to break the silence. "More diapers, more clothes. We might have to convert your office into the nursery." Dylan braked too hard at a red light, causing my hand to fly protectively over my stomach. "Sorry," he muttered. Wasn't paying attention. Of course he wasn't. "We'll figure it out," he added, but his tone lacked conviction. That's when it hit me, the thing I couldn't admit out loud yet. For the first time in our 3 years of marriage, I didn't know what my husband was really thinking, and that scared me more than anything else. At home, I sat curled in my studio chair, trying to focus on the unfinished illustrations due for a publisher in New York. But my hand trembled every time I picked up a pencil. I looked at the fairy on the page, her tiny hand stretched upward, reaching for something unseen. Maybe I was doing the same. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, Dylan scrolled through his phone, turned away from me. I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the faintest flutter from inside, like a whisper of life just beginning. I should have felt joy, but all I could feel was distance, and a fear I couldn't shake. The first real crack came 3 days after the ultrasound. Dylan forgot to pick up my prenatal vitamins, not once, but twice. I told myself it was just stress from work, that his new project was overwhelming him. But it was more than that. He was coming home later and later, always with some vague excuse about meetings running long or calls from the West Coast team. He didn't touch my belly the way he used to, didn't talk to the babies, didn't ask me how I was sleeping. And when I brought it up gently, he'd just sigh and say, "Tessa, please don't start." The worst part, I started blaming myself. Maybe I was too emotional, too tired, too consumed with the twins and my deadlines. Maybe I was changing in ways he couldn't understand. Pregnancy had turned my body into something foreign, and maybe that foreignness had extended to my heart. But deep down, I knew better. I knew this wasn't about hormones or stress. This was about something else. Something he wouldn't say out loud. It became obvious when Barbara showed up. Dylan's mother had never liked me. She was always polite on the surface. Too polite, but behind that tight-lipped smile was a quiet disapproval she never tried hard to hide. That day, she rang the doorbell with a box of pastries and that same frozen expression. "You look tired," she said the moment I opened the door. Carrying two must be exhausting. I forced a smile and let her in, trying to ignore the judgment in her tone. She walked into the kitchen like she owned it, set down her box of sweets, and poured herself tea without asking. "Where's Dylan?" she asked. "He said he'd be home early today." I blinked. He didn't mention that to me. Barbara raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. We sat down, her fingers tapping on the porcelain teacup like a metronome. Then she said it, just like that, like she was commenting on the weather. "Have you two thought about the cost of twins? 2 cribs, 2 sets of clothes, 2 car seats. Formula diapers. It adds up quickly." I stared at her, stunned. "Of course we've thought about it. We're managing." "Are you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Because Dylan needs room to grow. He's on the brink of a major promotion. And having 2 newborns, it's a lot of pressure. You won't be working, obviously, and he'll be responsible for everything." I felt the sting before the tears even had a chance to rise. "They're our children," I said, my voice tight. "We both wanted this." She gave me a look I'll never forget, pity mixed with disdain. "He wanted one," she said softly. "One child. Not twins. Not this." The walls of our kitchen suddenly felt like they were closing in. I pressed my hands into my lap, digging my nails into my palms just to keep from trembling. "You're wrong," I said, barely above a whisper. "Am I?" Barbara sipped her tea. "Did he tell you about the promotion? The new role they offered him last week?" I shook my head slowly. "No, he didn't." She smiled, like she'd just won something. "He didn't want to worry you, but it's a big opportunity. One he might have to turn down now that you're having 2. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, one hand on my belly, the other clutched around the blanket, trying to keep myself from unraveling. Dylan didn't come home until almost midnight. He kissed me on the forehead and whispered that he had to be up early again. When I asked about the promotion, he just said, "It's nothing serious yet." I didn't want to get your hopes up. But I knew it wasn't about my hopes. It was about his. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped being part of them. The pain struck around 2:17 a.m. Not sharp at first, just a dull cramp low in my abdomen, like the early stirrings of a storm. I shifted in bed, thinking it would pass. But within minutes, the pressure intensified, wrapping around my spine and squeezing the air from my lungs. I reached out to Dylan's side of the bed, but it was cold, untouched, empty. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed his number. 1 ring, 2. Then he answered, his voice thick with sleep, or maybe not. "What's wrong?" he muttered. "I'm in pain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong, Dylan. It feels bad. It feels serious." He was silent for a beat. Then came the words that made my blood freeze. "I'm not home," he said. "I'm out of town. I'm at a job site. Just call an ambulance. I'll get there as soon as I can." In the background, a woman's voice murmured something unintelligible. Dylan cursed under his breath and tried to muffle the phone. But I heard it. I heard her. I didn't argue. I just hung up. By the time the paramedics arrived, I could barely stand. My vision blurred as I opened the front door, leaning against a frame to keep from collapsing. They loaded me into the back of the ambulance, and as the sirens wailed through the night, I held my belly and whispered to my sons, "Hold on, okay? Just hold on." The next hours were a blur of bright lights, cold hands, and sterile air. IVs, monitors, a flurry of activity around me. Doctors speaking in low, urgent voices. The words placental abruption and preterm labor floated in and out of consciousness. I remember gripping a nurse's wrist, desperate. Please save them. And then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a dim hospital room, hooked up to a dozen machines. My body ached, but there was no blood, no screaming, just a steady beep from the fetal monitor nearby and the rhythmic hiss of oxygen. "Hey," said a voice beside me. I turned my head slowly. Harper. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her curls were pulled into a messy bun, and her mascara was smudged beneath her eyes. She was clutching my hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "You scared the hell out of me," she whispered. I blinked slowly. "The babies." "They're okay," she said. "For now. You're still early, 26 weeks, but they stabilized your vitals. You're on strict bed rest. They're monitoring you and the twins around the clock." Relief surged through me, so quickly it made me dizzy. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall. "Where's Dylan?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Harper looked away. "He hasn't shown up." Silence. Then, slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. His absence. The lies. The voice on the phone. My husband wasn't working late. He was with her. I tried to sit up, but Harper stopped me with a gentle hand. "Don't," she said. "Save your strength." She paused. "Tessa, I didn't just come here from the hospital. I went to your house first. I was going to grab your phone charger and some clothes. And that's when I saw him." I turned to her, heart pounding. "Saw him?" "He was there. With her." Harper's jaw clenched. They were talking about legal documents. Something about you being tied up in the hospital for at least 2 more weeks. Chelsea said, and I quote, "That gives us time to finish everything without a fight." My breath caught. They were planning something behind my back while I lay in a hospital bed fighting to keep our children alive. "What did you do?" I asked. "I walked in on them," Harper said, her eyes narrowing. "Told him exactly what I thought of the 2 of them. He had the audacity to act surprised. Said she was just a colleague. Like I didn't hear them talking about lawyers. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream, so I did the only thing I could. I stared at the ceiling and let my silence say everything, because in that moment, I knew my marriage was over. The next morning, I stared at my phone for a long time before I finally opened the message thread with Dylan. There were no missed calls, no texts, not even a question about how I was doing. I hadn't heard from him since that night. Not after the ambulance. Not after Harper told him I was in the hospital fighting to keep our children alive. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. Then I typed 4 words. "Is it all true?" I stared at those words for nearly a minute before hitting send. I expected silence, but a few minutes later, the screen lit up. Dylan was calling. I answered without a word. "Tessa," he began. His voice was unusually calm, too calm. "I wanted to talk to you about this in person. I didn't want you to find out like that." I said nothing. "I know this isn't the right time, but yes, I've been seeing someone. Her name is Chelsea. It just happened. I didn't plan it." I closed my eyes. "You didn't plan to lie to your pregnant wife?" I asked quietly. "You didn't plan to sneak around while I was busy keeping our family together? You didn't plan to vanish when I needed you most?" He sighed. I've been feeling disconnected for a while now. You've been so focused on the babies, on your work. And I felt like we weren't even in the same life anymore." I nearly laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "Because I'm growing 2 human beings inside of me, Because I'm exhausted and terrified and still trying to meet deadlines while vomiting into a trash can every morning. You're twisting my words, he snapped, the mask slipping for a second. This is hard for me too. Oh, poor you, I whispered. It must be so hard cheating on your wife while she's carrying your children. There was a pause. Tessa, I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The words hit like ice water down my spine. I shouldn't have been surprised. Not after what Harper had seen. Not after hearing Chelsea's voice on the phone. But still, something inside me shattered. You're divorcing me while I'm in a hospital bed. My voice cracked, while I'm barely holding on to our sons. I didn't want it this way, he muttered. But we can't keep pretending. This isn't working. And Chelsea is? He didn't answer. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Then I let the silence stretch around me, thick and suffocating. My hands rested on the curve of my belly, 2 tiny lives still holding on. I would not let his betrayal take them too. That afternoon, a nurse brought in a new visitor. I turned, expecting Harper or maybe my mom, but it wasn't either. It was Aiden, Dr. Aiden Blake. He was still in scrubs, a light sheen of fatigue on his face. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, a bit messier, but his eyes were the same. Steady, quiet, kind. Hi, he said, a little breathless, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. I blinked at him, stunned. Aiden? What? I work here now. Neurology. I transferred about a month ago. I stared at him, the timing almost too strange to be real. I didn't know you were here, he added quickly. The nurse told me your name was on the roster. I wasn't sure if I should come say hi. But then I heard. I'm sorry. He paused. Are you okay? It was the first time anyone had asked me that without an agenda. No judgment, no blame, just concern. I felt something inside me loosen. No, I said, barely above a whisper, but I will be. He nodded and sat at the foot of the bed, not too close, not too far. Can I do anything? Just stay, I said, for a little while. And he did. No questions, no explanations, just quiet. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, I woke to the sound of papers rustling. A nurse stood at the foot of my bed, placing a neatly clipped folder onto the tray table. Your husband dropped this off, she said quietly. He asked that it be reviewed today. I stared at the folder like it was a live wire. I didn't touch it. A few minutes later, Harper walked in, coffee in hand, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. Her eyes dropped to the papers immediately. What's that? Divorce papers, I said, my voice flat. Apparently, he wants to settle everything amicably. She set the coffee down with a hard thud. He wants you to sign divorce papers while you're lying here trying to keep his children alive. I gave a bitter smile. Timing's never been his strong suit. Before either of us could say more, the door opened again, and in walked Dylan. He looked polished, like he always did for meetings, clean shave, tailored jacket, expensive cologne. Beside him was a tall man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. His lawyer. Dylan gave me a nod that was far too casual for the situation. Tessa, I figured it would be best to handle this now, while there's time. I didn't say a word. The lawyer, some well-groomed man who introduced himself as Evan Caldwell, opened his folder and began talking as if this were a corporate transaction. We've prepared a preliminary agreement. It's straightforward. The condo stays in your name. Dylan will pay child support. We've even included a one-time supplemental payment to cover initial expenses for the twins. I glanced at Harper. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought she might explode. Evan continued, flipping pages like he was discussing weekend plans. This arrangement allows both parties to move forward quickly and without additional emotional strain. Emotional strain. I almost laughed. When he finished, Dylan looked at me expectant. I thought this was fair. We can both move on cleanly. I stared at the document for a long moment. Then, slowly, I pushed it back toward him. No, I said. Dylan blinked. What? I said no. My voice was calm, but something in it startled even me. I'm not signing anything. Not today. Not while I'm hooked up to fetal monitors, praying my sons survive. He shifted, clearly annoyed. Tessa, come on. There's no point dragging this out. No, I repeated, firmer this time. You don't get to come in here with your lawyer and your clean break plan while I'm still bleeding from what you've done. You want to move on? Fine, but not on your terms. I saw his jaw tighten. You always make things harder than they need to be. And you always choose what's easy, I snapped, including walking away from your family. Evan tried to step in again, but Harper raised a hand. You should both leave. Now. I'm trying to be reasonable, Dylan muttered. Then be reasonable somewhere else, I said. Because the woman you're talking to, the one who used to bend and apologize and smooth things over for you, she's gone. There was a long silence. Finally, Dylan stood. We'll revisit this after the twins are born. Do that, I said. And bring your best lawyer, because I'm bringing mine. They left without another word. When the door closed, Harper let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Tessa, you were incredible. I didn't feel incredible. I felt hollow. But beneath the hollow there was steel. Later that evening, Aiden stopped by. He didn't ask questions, didn't mention Dylan or the papers. Instead, he brought a soft, leather-bound sketchbook and a set of pencils. I thought you might need a way to breathe, he said. I turned the pages slowly, fingers grazing the blank sheets. My eyes burned. It's been a long time, I murmured. Then it's time again, he said. And somehow, I believed him. It happened the next night. 1 minute, I was sketching in bed. Something soft and loose, the outline of 2 tiny hands reaching toward each other. And the next, a sharp, searing pain knife through my abdomen. I froze. The pencil slipped from my hand. The sketchbook tumbled to the floor. Then the second wave came, stronger, meaner. It pulled the air from my lungs and left me gasping. I fumbled for the call button, but my hands weren't steady enough. Everything inside me screamed something was wrong. A nurse burst in less than 30 seconds later, followed by 2 more. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I heard the urgency in their voices, felt the cold sting of a monitor being slapped onto my belly, the whoosh of the oxygen mask before it covered my face. Tessa, someone said close to my ear. Try to breathe. We're seeing significant contractions. We need to act quickly. My world tilted sideways. They rolled me into a different room. The ceiling lights passed above in blinding flashes as I stared upward, willing myself not to fall apart. But my body didn't listen. My hands trembled uncontrollably. My vision swam. I thought of the twins. I thought of how they'd never see the nursery I'd planned, or the storybooks I'd picked out. I thought of Dylan, not because I missed him, but because he wasn't here. He chose to leave, and now I was left fighting alone. Suddenly, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. I'm here, Tessa. It's me, Aiden. I turned my head weakly and saw him in surgical scrubs, his expression all focus and quiet fire. He took my hand, warm and grounding. You're not alone. We're going to do everything we can. But you have to stay calm, okay? The babies need you. I couldn't speak, but I held on tighter. There was shouting. Someone mentioned blood pressure. Another voice called out heart rates, 1 for each baby. Then I heard it. Baby B is in distress. We need to prep for emergency cesarean now. Aiden didn't flinch. Tessa, he said, bending down, his face inches from mine. Look at me. Breathe with me. Just like this. And somehow, between the fear and the pain I did, I breathed. They rushed me into a surgical suite. I remember the cold, the beeping, the masked faces, a firm female voice saying, "We've got this, Mama. Hold on for your boys." Then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, the lights were dim. The room was quiet. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, only that I was still hooked to machines and that my body ached in places I hadn't even known could ache. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. "You're okay," she said gently. "You made it through. And the babies, they're stable. Still inside." I blinked. "No surgery." She smiled. "We were ready, but the contractions slowed just in time. Your body fought. So did they." Tears slid down the sides of my face. Silent, relentless. Some time later, my mom appeared at the door, windblown and breathless. She rushed to my side and cupped my face in her hands like I was 6 years old again and had scraped my knees on the playground. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you scared me. I thought I was losing them," I choked out. She shook her head fiercely. "Not on my watch. And not on yours." We sat together for a long time, her hand over mine, our breaths sinking slowly. In the background, I heard the rhythmic hum of the monitors tracking 2 fragile heartbeats. They were still here, and so was I. Later, Aiden came by again. He didn't knock, just stepped in, holding a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a set of new charcoal pencils and a tiny watercolor palette. "Figured the last ones might have been cursed," he joked gently. I smiled for the first time in days. "You saved them," I whispered. "No," he said. "You did. I just reminded you how." And in that moment, with 2 lives still safe inside me, a mother at my side, and a quiet man who cared more than he let on, I felt the shift, the beginning of something new. I didn't hear from Dylan for another 4 days. No texts, no calls, no questions about the twins. Nothing. Then, just after breakfast one morning, a nurse poked her head into my room and said, "There's someone here to see you." I looked up, expecting Harper or my mom, but it was him. Dylan stepped inside wearing the same crisp shirt he always wore for business lunches. Expensive, carefully pressed, a little too perfect for a hospital visit. He looked thinner, or maybe I just hadn't seen him in natural light in so long that I forgot what he looked like when he wasn't filtered through memory. "Hey," he said, like we were acquaintances meeting at a coffee shop. "Can I come in?" I nodded stiffly. "You already are." He lingered near the door, awkward, like he knew he didn't belong here. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. About what I said. About how I left things." I didn't respond. "I'm not here to fight," he added quickly. I wanted to say I'm sorry." That word, sorry, hung in the air between us like smoke. Late, thin, weightless. "Are you sorry you cheated?" I asked quietly. "Or sorry it didn't work out with her?" His eyes flinched. "Chelsea left. She said she wasn't ready for kids. Or responsibility. She went back to LA last week." "Of course she did," I said softly. "I just thought, maybe we could try again. For the boys." I looked at him, really looked. At the man I once trusted with my whole heart. The man who ghosted his pregnant wife in a hospital bed. Who handed her divorce papers while she was on bed rest. Who vanished when things got hard. And I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. I was done. "We can co-parent," I said carefully. "We can figure that out. But there is no us anymore, Dylan. I don't want to rebuild what we had. Because what we had died the moment you walked away." He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he just nodded slowly. "I deserve that." "Yes," I said. "You do." He left shortly after, mumbling something about checking in with his lawyer. I didn't watch him go. I didn't cry either. Instead, I picked up the sketchbook Aiden had given me. The page was still blank. I pressed a pencil to the paper and drew 2 small feet, one curled, one stretched, as if they were kicking gently from within. That night, Harper returned with a small canvas bag and a mischievous smile. "What did you do?" I asked. "Nothing terrible," she grinned. "I just happened to send your high school portfolio to Summit Hill Gallery. You know, the one in downtown Denver." My eyes widened. "Harper, they loved it," she said, cutting me off. "They want to meet you after you're discharged." Said your early work has raw emotional texture, whatever that means. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. You always said you'd get back to painting someday, she added. Why not now? The next morning, Aiden came in during rounds. He glanced at the sketch on my lap and smiled. You're drawing again. I nodded. Trying. His eyes met mine. It suits you. Later that week, the boys gave us a scare again. Nothing major, but enough to keep me in the hospital for 2 more weeks. I didn't mind. The longer they stayed inside me, the stronger they'd be. Every heartbeat on the monitor felt like a victory. And as the days passed, things began to shift. Dylan stopped calling. My mom started talking about moving in after the birth, just for a while to help. Harper brought lavender oils and old school photos to make me laugh. Aiden kept checking on me, always pretending it was routine, but lingering just a little longer than he needed to. One evening, I caught him standing at the window, watching the sky turn purple over the mountains. When he turned, his expression was quiet, full of something I didn't have a name for yet. You've changed, he said. So have you. He walked over and handed me a small envelope. This came for you. Inside was an invitation, an official one from the Summit Hill Art Collective. They wanted me to be part of their fall showcase. I stared at the paper, barely able to breathe. It felt unreal, unreachable. A year ago, I was just a wife who drew in the margins of grocery lists. Now, I was something else. A mother, a survivor, and maybe, just maybe, an artist again.